We're starting with the private members' bill, that's going to bring in, it looks like, there's going to be a free vote on voluntary dying. Now, this is really been, well, it's been around for a long time, but it's been brought to the fore by Esther Rantzen. How likely is this to pass?
I think relatively likely, actually. More likely than it ever has been before. And obviously, a huge credit to Esther Rantzen. I think the other big changing point has been Keir Starmer, saying that he is fervently in favour of assisted dying. He's now Prime Minister, of course. He's the first Prime Minister in history to support assisted dying, and that sends a signal. Even though it will be a free vote of MPs, not going to be told how to vote by Keir Starmer. It'll be a matter of conscience. But nevertheless, it alters the framing of this whole debate. The last time MPs voted on this in 2015, David Cameron was Prime Minister. He was against assisted dying, so it just changes the tone. And we've had, obviously, a seismic change in the composition of Parliament since then as well. We've got far more Labour MPs, Lib Dems, Greens. They tend to lean more in favour of assisted dying generally, although it is complicated. So I think it's quite likely that it might pass.
Dame Esther Rantzen has been such an emotive campaigner on this, hasn't she? I mean, she's talked a lot to this programme about all sorts of things over the years, but brilliantly and passionately about this. She spoke to Susanna in April when she was still more able to do that and summed it up for many people. Let's have a look at what she said.
I had 3 deaths that happened very soon after each other. There was Desi, my husband, there was my mother, and there was our dog. And there's no question that our dog had the best death. We discovered he had cancer, and before the symptoms got painful, we put him to sleep. We can offer our beloved pets a pain-free death, and we can't offer it to our beloved family.
I mean, she's such a campaigner on so many issues and has thrown incredible sort of weight behind those that feel it. A close friend of mine's mother has just been through a very difficult passing away, and she, you know, would have loved this law to be in place. But, of course, there are many that fear it too, aren't there? There are more complex. The black and white, I think we can all understand, but there are many complex situations where people feel that the person that would be doing the choosing is perhaps vulnerable, maybe not able to choose, maybe they might be exposed to people around them taking advantage of this. We have got extraordinary palliative care options in this country when they're available, and some people argue that putting energy into better palliative care services is a better option. What are your 2 views?
Go on, Nels.
It's one of those moments where I just don't have a strong view either way, whereas I can see the need in which... So a friend of mine recently passed away. He was 80 years old. He was as sharp as it gets, but his body effectively wasn't there anymore, and sadly he passed away. It was a devastating
Did he want
moment.
that to happen earlier?
I do not believe he wanted that to happen earlier whatsoever. He was full of life.
So he wasn't somebody that was asking for this?
He wasn't somebody who was asking for it, but you can see physically he was not... He's nowhere near who he used to be. So I can understand when your body gives up on your mind, essentially, and then you're in a lot of pain. I completely understand that. On the other side of things, too, life is absolutely sacred. And as far as this policy is concerned, my fear is one of... It's not just somebody who might... My fear is the feeling of somebody being made to feel that they might be a burden, that there might be an element of coercion for them to take this decision. And it's open to potential abuse, amongst other different things. And I think, once again, if we can find a better way to take care of people and recognise the value of care...
But it's the funding, isn't it? Ian, I know you have very strong feelings about this.
Well, you say it's there.
Well,
but for some people,
the skills are there.
Sure.
It's the availability of it.
It depends what condition you have. I mean, if you have MND, for example, motor neurone disease, there is nothing that anyone can do to make you more comfortable, to sort of to do anything to alleviate your pain. I'm fully in favour of this, 100%. The only difficulty I see is drafting the legislation, because you've got to cover all eventualities. But if that is the strongest argument that the other side have, well, you can't cover all eventualities, I don't think that's a good enough one.
So for the majority of people, this will be of such huge benefit. It's up to the lawyers to get it right in the detail.
The problem is, 10 years ago, if we were having this discussion, I think I would have been much more sceptical. But having hosted various phone-ins on it on LBC, you hear people's individual stories, and you think, well, what right have I to sort of, I mean, if I was an MP, to vote against someone having a good death? I don't want to suffer agonies before I die. I would like to have the choice. And personally, I would go a lot further than this. I mean, the proposal is you would have to have 2 doctors sign a piece of paper if you're within 6 months of dying through a terminal illness. I would go a lot further than that. And
actually, Kim Leadbeater hasn't defined yet the exact parameters of the bill.
So
Definitely for terminally ill people, but not necessarily.
One of the arguments was that it should be something where you're likely to die within 6 months, and the people that are against this, or maybe against is too strong a word, arguing against a fear of the law for it, say that a lot of things can happen in 6 months. You know, no doctor can really define it. A lot of conditions can happen in 6 months. So it is going to be getting the detail, like you say, and absolutely right to protect the vulnerable, isn't it?
Yeah, and the detail is the really difficult bit. I completely agree with Ian on that. And actually, if you look at other countries, that's where they've really got bogged down. And there are all sorts of debates in Canada, for example, where they introduced the law, then they expanded it, and people feel it's gone too far.
Or in Belgium, for example.
Belgium as well.
Have euthanasia now for young people.
Yes,
a 14-year-old took her own life because of depression. That's the slippery slope argument.
That's the concern,
so drawing a line is really, really hard. And equally, there are people pushing for the law to be much, much broader. As Ian says, you know, there are lots of people who actually wouldn't fall into the category of having a terminal illness but may still be in insufferable pain, and they would like to potentially have the option. But the other thing that's changed radically over the past few years is the number of other countries that have legalised it. And here in the British Isles, the Isle of Man is pretty close now to legalising it. It'll probably happen in 2027 there. So it's no longer this kind of idea that only happens in a few outlying countries. There is actually a chance that England and Wales could become the outlier in not legalising it if it doesn't go ahead here.
And the danger is that people, for example, who go to Dignitas, who might take a relative, are in legal limbo. They come back and it's up to local prosecutors, in effect, to make a determination about whether or not they should stand trial for manslaughter.
I mean, would this not apply to Scotland, then? Is this a devolved issue? Because
it is a devolved issue.
That could be a real issue.
They have a separate criminal system. It is working its way through, but at a separate time frame.
But, I mean, if Scotland passes it and the rest of the United Kingdom doesn't... I mean, think of the implications of that.
I've just been going up to Scotland.
Quite.
So.
Well, I think it's probably more likely to be the other way. England and Wales potentially will pass it because they're closer to that decision. And then
I'm not sure it will, because, I mean, the House of Commons
travelling.
might pass it, but the House of Lords might not.
Well, absolutely. But for people like Esther Rantzen, and she represents hundreds of thousands of concerned families and thousands of individuals.
In the end, Nels, I think people on... I mean, I know you said you're sort of slightly undecided, but I think you're probably on the anti-side. But for how do you justify to Esther Rantzen saying, I'm going to deny you the death that you want?
I wouldn't justify it to Esther Rantzen. I wouldn't personalise it that much or so in the slightest bit.
But you have to.
I do think
Isn't it?
if it was somebody who I knew and loved, and they were pondering that decision, and effectively I was there and I was perhaps a caregiver to them, and I had to decide between this person I know and I love is somebody who, yep, you're going through a lot, but we're still working through it, versus you're basically going to take your own life, which I'm actually... We're at loss either way, we're in mourning either way. It would be the most unbelievably difficult decision I'd ever made.
Which is why the law has to be right,
be your decision.
But it would be my responsibility to, as somebody who loves them, to try and actually persuade them either way. So I would be saying, look, let's continue to fight.
No, that's the whole point. It's not up to someone to persuade someone. It's up to them to make their own decision.
But
we are all influenced by...
we're all a product of our environment, so we're all influenced by people. people, and that's how it goes. But my fear in this too is that influencing ability is when somebody gets a little bit older and suddenly they're starting to feel a bit like a burden, and they start to made to feel like a burden, or hey, have nursing homes a bit too expensive. Let's consider that, and that's what
they would need a terminal illness to qualify for the bill.
For now,
so it's not just you've reached the age of 85 and you're a bit frail, therefore actually, Grandma, we'd like you to go down this road. They wouldn't qualify for that. And actually, I met a woman last week, Helen Skelton, fantastic woman, stage 4 cancer, but lives life to the absolute max. What she fears, though, is her death, because she's allergic to painkillers. So her death will be painful, that's a certainty. And I think Ian's right, that's the difficulty here, is how do you tell Helen that she must face a painful death? She has absolutely no choice. You know, it's such a difficult ethical issue.
It's a difficult ethical issue, but, you know, we want to have control of our own lives, and those that argue for it say that part of that is controlling how we leave the life.
And also,
as well,
let's think of the loved ones who sometimes face the awful decision. I mean, say the wife has got a very painful end approaching, and she says to her husband, I can't stand this anymore. Can you, like, smother me or whatever? And there have been many cases over the years that have gone to court. Invariably, the judge has compassion and doesn't send the person to prison. But nobody should be put in that position, and that's why a law like this is so important.
Well, that's one of the things that Esther Rantzen has said, isn't it? That she saw the impact on her children of seeing her husband die in such a difficult way.
I had 3 grown men crying on my programme last night who had been in that situation.
You had what, sorry?
3 grown men, probably in the 70s or 80s, crying on the radio because they had been in that situation where they were being begged by their wives to end it.
Kurt, just out of curiosity, do wives call in and actually to make the same thing about the husbands?
They didn't last night.
I'm just wondering there's a potential... Just wondering if there's potential
maybe it's
discrepancy
because they passed away.
Yeah,
well.
maybe, yeah.
In the instance of your show, wasn't it? Should we talk about something else? Because I'm sure we'll return to this. The vote on it is October the 16th, am I right?
Be introduced then, and then a vote before Christmas.
Could you just explain what a free vote is? Because I hope people really understand.
It just essentially means MPs aren't whipped by their parties. They're not told by their party leaders which way to vote. They can just follow their own consciences.
Because Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, and Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, are pretty much against it, as far as we can see. So
and the government ministers have been told they must remain neutral during the whole debate as well. So they're not allowed to go on the airwaves. You know, when you're interviewing them on the morning rounds, they're not going to start saying I'm for or against and speaking on behalf of the government. They'll have to remain neutral.
It's a pure conscience issue for every single person. Interesting.
Well, on conscience, I wonder how Boris Johnson feels. Got his new book.
Well, he's certainly unleashed it. That's the title of the book, published in a couple of weeks, I think, isn't it?
You're giving him a free
early.
I wonder how his conscience feels. Some might say send out a search party in revealing, amongst other things, what the Queen says in private. I have to say, I skim-read the book last night, got to page 574, and I was surprised, which is a mild euphemism. Amongst other things, he talks about what the late Queen disclosed about President Macron. I discussed with Her Majesty the Queen. She'd met all the leaders and their wives at a splendid dinner. She observed that there seemed to be an interesting age gap between Monsieur and Madame Macron. Yes, I said, he married his teacher. Well, said the Queen, she didn't teach him much about history. What do you think about that?
Excellent. That's what we want from books like this.
OK.
I mean, look, if the Queen had still been alive, I suspect he wouldn't have put it in. But she isn't, so he did.
To his eternal credit, I was here about a month ago, sat beside Kwesi Kwarteng, the former Chancellor, and he revealed why he was giggling at the Queen's funeral. It's because the Queen had actually told him a joke that he remembered on his birthday at the Privy Council. When I asked him what the joke was, he categorically denied to say it in public because he just wanted to keep that confidentiality between him and the Queen, because he didn't want it to be something that was said in public, which I thought was a gentlemanly and proper and statesmanly thing to do.
Quasi.
Yes, of course.
But then he's not trying to sell a book, is he? And what Ian's saying, is that as a publisher, and it's a weighty old tome. I mean, Rob is the best speed reader I've ever met, and sometimes he reads it in Russian. So you got to pay $500 when you received it last night. I haven't got that far yet. I've been skimming through a lot of it as much as I can.
Written.
Well, I think it's very energetically
What would you
written.
expect,
It really
Rob?
sounds like him. It sounds like him. It's a few things have been picked out in the Daily Telegraph. They're already revealed, and that people will get to read it themselves should they want to. One of the things that less politics and more detail, which is the sort of stuff we want, is apparently in the book he says that Benjamin Netanyahu used this sort of secluded bathroom in the Foreign Office, kind of like a slightly sort of hidden private bathroom in the Foreign Office. He says it's the same as a posh London club. It's a secret annex. That might not help you, having never been to a posh London club, what that means. But as far as I can see, it's a little hidden bathroom. And then when they did their normal sweep after he left, there were bugs left in there. Are we surprised about that? Is that the sort of detail that we want to hear about?
Well, it is the sort of detail we want to hear about. I mean, if the accusation is that Netanyahu himself put a bug in Boris's toilet...
Which is the accusation, yep.
Well, I do find that quite surprising, but I'm sure there may have been other possibilities, but...
No, well, I'm surprised. I'm surprised by it. But states bug states, essentially. That's where even allied states bug each other or so. Barack Obama had to apologise to Angela Merkel for bugging her, for pretty much spying on her, pretty much when she was Chancellor of Germany. Yeah, when she was Chancellor in Germany. So that's pretty much how these things shouldn't become. It's not a nice thing to know, not a nice thing to do in the slightest bit. Actually, it's quite a little bit scary, dare I say, because somebody left a bug in my bathroom. I would be devastated.
I would wonder what the hell they were hoping to hear in Boris Johnson's toilet.
Kate, I think we all know.
Thing that causes big political ramifications.
I think Nels is right. It happens all the time. So, quite frankly, if you're getting a visit from a foreign dignitary, you should expect there to be some kind of shenanigans going on. Normally, though, you expect this from hostile states rather than close allies. But nevertheless, you know, as you say, America bugging Germany, it does happen between friends too.
Right. I mean, there's shenanigans and stuff. I mean, the book largely, I have to say, focuses on his time in London Mayor. I'm not sure if it's been through the fact checkers. I'm sure it will in due course. I have my own views on some of the successes that he announces in this book. It's rather self-congratulatory. But there's, in the limited bits where he talks about being Prime Minister, which is less of the book, he is completely unapologetic about parties in lockdown. I hardly attended, and I didn't eat cake, and I didn't inhale, etc. I mean, he was fined. And yet, I mean, you've read this, no doubt. He was, to say the least, not just unapologetic, but pretty much gave his undivided indifference to all of the criticism about attending lockdowns while people weren't able to attend their family's funerals.
OK, can I just boo those things, Paul? I don't know if you've read it all yet.
I have, yes.
Oh,
well, not all of it. I'm not as fast as Rob, but...
not as well as
I've read the bits on Partygate, for sure.
Yeah, he says, I saw enough to say that parties are simply too festive a word. I was confident of our fundamental innocence. He still feels he's done nothing wrong. Many people will say maybe he hasn't done anything wrong. Others might say they feel desperately uncomfortable. And as you said, Bob, he's been fined for it.
It's almost like he's sort of retracting the apology he gave. In fact, he hints that the biggest mistake was apologising for it. He feels that he ended up blowing it into a bigger row than it needs to be by owning it and apologising for it. But, you know, this is a memoir, I think maybe peppered with a little bit of amnesia as well. It's easy to look back on things now and say, you know, why was everyone fussing about a gathering in the Cabinet room? You know, it was just a few of us getting together to, you know, quickly mark my birthday. Well, those were the exact kind of things that other people weren't doing at that time and had to sacrifice at that time. And they may look like very basic freedoms, very simple freedoms now, but those cost people very significantly at the time by not being able to do that, not being able to have a last birthday with a grandma or a first birthday with a grandson.
And on that note, I mean, Kate, I'm not sure if it was a surprise to you whether he came to speak to you about it, but he does mention Derek.
Does mention Derek. Now, when someone said he mentions Derek, and it's about when both Derek and Boris worked at The Spectator during that era, long before I met him, I always look at those potential quotes in book with some fear and trepidation. If I'm absolutely honest, because I didn't know Derek then, and it was a time when Derek was very outspoken about things. Yeah, you knew it back then, yes. And you know that it could be quite lively. What he does say is, and he has since, Boris Johnson, been very personally kind to me about the issue of Derek's sickness and what he went through, because, of course, he was ill too. And he talks about that and said, you know, I'd found out, I read and heard about the fact that Derek was very sick. I always knew him as smart, self-confidence and young. Now he was in a coma on life support. And it made me realise that if I and Derek could get this, anyone could get this. He also goes on to say that he never fully recovered, which those that suffered the damage of COVID will know that that is part of the problem in their ongoing arguments. Derek, on his death certificate, I think was one of the first people, certainly at that hospital, was the first person to have on the death certificate end organ, which means vital organ, COVID damage, because the doctors wanted to make the point that the damage of COVID was what killed him and not try and pass it off as a cardiac arrest or anything else, because it was the damage. And I think for people fighting with COVID damage, long COVID, in whatever degree it is, that's the point that they want to make. It's not about recovering, it's the damage that's caused.
Can I just say,
Yes.
I'm glad that Boris Johnson has written this, but I haven't read a word of it. I hate reading serialisation, so I wait for the book to come out. It is said that if you write an autobiography, it is a work of fiction about yourself. But it is the one opportunity that a politician has to put on the record their point of view. And I take what you say, Rob, but he will have a different perspective, and it's right that we should be able to read that perspective, whether we agree with him or not. I mean, I imagine it's a good read, because he is a great writer, it has to be said.
And a very entertaining personality.
Exactly,
you know, I think even his enemies would say that, wouldn't they, Paul?
It's not going to be a boring read, is it? It's an entertaining read.
I think there's what you just pointed out, his words about Derek and himself or so, actually speaks to the inherent contradiction within Boris Johnson. Within 1 second, he oozes empathy for somebody like himself who went, particularly for himself, if he oozes empathy for pretty much what him and Derek went through in terms of the illness.
Excuse me.
But on the other hand, also, he then justifies the parties that actually made a mockery of the fact of how we would potentially fight a pandemic in the future, and pretty much debased his authority as far as being a Prime Minister is concerned. So it speaks once again to the inherent contradiction of Boris Johnson.
People can listen to him tonight. There's the Tom Bradby interview exclusive on
another
ITV.
Opportunity for him to put it in his own words here.
At 7 p.m. A story that's found its way into the Sun today, which I have to say I was slightly surprised by and had to read twice. This is a breakfast with the business secretary. No doubt you saw this. Labour facing a new controversy after offering companies a chance to have breakfast with the business secretary in exchange for tens of thousands of pounds. Advertised the IVM Manchester, we're thrilled to extend you a unique opportunity to become a commercial partner at our business policy roundtable discussion over breakfast. Non-exclusive offer 15,000, exclusive 30,000. That was offered by the Labour Party. Now, just to be clear, Jonathan Reynolds didn't attend in the end. But the Labour Party or somebody...
the invite... I'm not sure the bit is happening. The invite went out yesterday.
The invite went out yesterday, right?
Yeah.
This is the backdrop as we know what's going on with money for dresses and Taylor Swift tickets. How shocked are you about this, Ian?
If that had happened in 1995, 1998, I wouldn't have been shocked at all. But given the current circumstances, I mean, you have to be pretty crass to not realise what the PR consequences of sending out something like this is. And because...
Well, sorry, it's not just PR. Well, it's the idea of doing it in the first place.
Absolutely. Political parties do have to raise money. We don't have state funding of political parties, so they have to raise money to exist. But there are ways of doing it. And, I mean, particularly with the business secretary, or indeed any cabinet minister... I think it's one thing for a cabinet minister to attend a massive sort of fundraising dinner where there are hundreds of people there and a minister is allocated to each table almost randomly. That's one thing. But this is quite clearly... it gives the impression of wrongdoing.
I mean, Paul, this is on... If you're scouring your Sun newspaper to find this, I don't think it is in the paper. This appeared online overnight, Paul. You might correct me if I'm wrong. It looks a bit of a muck-up, doesn't it, on one level, but a muck-up of sort of really worrying proportions, seeing what the position that Sir Keir Starmer's in. What's your take on it?
It seems surprising that these decisions are still being made, quite frankly. When you're in the middle of that furore, wouldn't you just scale back anything that looked in any way inappropriate? And I was surprised, actually, by the whole scandal in terms of nobody saying this doesn't really pass the sniff test, you know, getting given dresses or glasses or suits, especially when Keir Starmer had made such a point of difference with the Conservatives, saying, we will be the party of integrity, I will govern in the national service. And yet, you know, he's fallen into a lot of the same traps his predecessors have. And I just think if you're going to make that argument that you're a man of integrity, you have to be absolutely beyond reproach. And he's failed on that. And I have heard voters say to me, I'm disappointed. I was voting Labour because I wanted a change, and it seems like it's just the same old, same old.
I think that there's an issue here. Paul and you are both right. Corruption, sadly, has crept into British politics, and we have to now start to call it out. And of course, there's the issue of party funding, and I think that we have to political funding. We have to find a way to actually maybe we need to start considering how we fund politics in this party, but in order to get the corruption out of it. But the key thing here is that the key broader issue is that corruption's crept into British politics, but Labour's quite bad at it. That for petty amounts of money, they're destroying their reputation.
Well, bad at it's one thing. Can I just ask you? We've got very limited time. First-class stamps rise to £1.65 on Monday. It's the last weekend for you to buy them at a decent price. It's extraordinary. We'd be buying your stamps this year.
I can't remember the last time I ever posted a first-class letter, and it certainly won't encourage me to do so in the future.
Oh,
well, if you're a normal
sending
person,
little love notes to everybody.
Christmas cards.
I'm not.
You don't
I'm not
send
that kind of boy, Kate.
Oh,
do you send thank you cards if you've been to a dinner party?
No, I send an email.
You send an email?
Yeah.
Well,
what about you, Nels?
Well, that's old-fashioned manners.